Hey folks, how's it going? It's Rob Avis here. It's 12 o'clock on Monday, and we are live talking about Design for Freedom, 13 steps to empower yourself with the knowledge to transform your life and land. Today, I'm going to be sharing part of my 13 steps that I've kind of gone back into my life and looked at to help you to fast track your journey, if you will. And I'll explain all of that here shortly. If you're just coming in right now, make sure you introduce yourself, put your name up into the chat window, and let us know where you're calling in from. And I will get to the presentation here really quickly. We're probably going to be just under an hour. I'll present probably for 20 or 30 minutes. Then you guys are welcome to ask me whatever questions you've got. All right, so just introduce yourself there. I'm just getting a few things set up here on my end. Would love to know where you're calling in from, and we can get into the content here right away. All right, I'm gonna share my screen right now. Just gonna get my PowerPoint set up, and we can get into the content. All right, so today we're going to be talking about design for freedom. And I came up with this presentation just recently, and it was totally by accident. And so I'm going to go through why I decided to put this together. And I think it's pretty poignant. We've been recently de-indexed on Google. We're re-indexed now, but for the last little while, we were not visible on Google. And as a result of that, it forced us to go back to our roots and really understand why we do permaculture, why we run Verge Permaculture, why people come and engage the information that we have to offer. And so we had a lot of conversations. We had a lot of stressful periods in the last 3 months trying to figure out why we exist and what it was that got us into this business in the first place. And not just business, you know, Verge Permaculture is actually just a higher expression of our beliefs, morals, and values. And so we had to really do a lot of soul searching. In the meantime, while we were de-indexed, while we were off the search and nobody was finding us and it's kind of lonely over in our little corner here, we were writing a book, which we've now finished. It's Rainwater Harvesting. It's actually available for pre-sale on Amazon right now, which is exciting. That'll be coming out later this year. But that was a really stressful project. We had a couple of consulting projects that were coming to a close. And so we had to finish those off, the de-indexing thing, and I launched a passive solar greenhouse course. So there was a lot of stuff that kind of just got crushed into this last 3 months, and it really forced a lot of introspection. And a crisis is a horrible thing to waste. It's an opportunity in disguise. You always have to turn problems into solutions. And so this is the cream, I guess, that surfaced out of the last 3 months. And I thought that I would share it with you guys because I think there's some learnings in here. And so I'm going to go back many years in my life, and I actually have gone back many years in my life and kind of just looked back at it and tried to figure out what it was that got me interested in all of this stuff, and what were the steps that I took to, as I'm saying in this presentation, design for freedom. So to capture the essence of what it was that finally got me to this location. So if you're just joining us right now, let us know what your name is, where you're calling from, and that'd be great. Okay, so after that hugely stressful period of time that I was, in the last 3 months when I was working on my book and my course and dealing with this Google de-index and all that other stuff, we kind of got it all done. And then all of a sudden, my parents offered to host us down in Mexico. Many years ago, believe it or not, my parents and my whole family, we ran a cheesecake business. We had 40,000 square feet of manufacturing capacity in Edmonton, Alberta, and we would produce anywhere from 20 to 100,000 cakes in a day, like full-on industrial food. And my parents made a sale in their business to Walmart right at the very end of their business. And I'll tell you why it ended here shortly. And ended up selling $1 million of lava cakes to Walmart. And lava cakes are these tiny little cakes. And when you put them in the microwave, they explode, and they kind of erupt like a volcano. And oh, thanks, Frankie. That's the first time I've ever had super chat. That was really kind of you. So they put the lava cake for sale to Walmart, and it was $1 million order. And Walmart rejected it because the cakes were not perfectly symmetrical. And most cakes are not built in machine shops, and so they are not perfectly symmetrical. And we ended up going bankrupt, actually. And that was really hard on the family. It was really hard on my dad. It was really hard on my mom. And so luckily, my dad, ironically, had been building his ark in the back of his factory. He had a sailboat that he bought for very little money in Florida and was repairing it. And so when the business went bankrupt, my dad asked my brother to buy the boat off of the receivers so that he'd have a place to live because he lost everything. So my brother did that. And my dad had it shipped out to the West Coast. It was ironic that the boat was finished because he was rebuilding it from nothing pretty much. So it was ironic that the boat was finished right as the business was going bankrupt. And so we shipped it to the West Coast. My mom and my dad then sailed down to Mexico, and they lived there for a number of years because they could live on their CPP, basically their the money that they had accumulated by working for 40 or 50 years. And so anyways, that's why they're down in Mexico. They've recently started another business. They've started a local food truck where they're they're producing meat pies in Edmonton. And if you haven't tried it out, you're going to want to try that. So they've kind of come back from the ashes, but they still have this boat in Mexico. So we got invited back down to Mexico to spend a week with them and basically decompress. And as a result of that, we ended up meeting this really neat family, and also spending a lot of time with my parents as well. And both spending time with my parents, but also spending time with this really neat family, which I'm going to talk about here shortly, brought me back to the original roots as to why I got into permaculture, why I left my oil and gas job, my great salary, and I got into doing what I do today. And what I realized was that when my dad actually lost his business, he actually reclaimed his life. So all of a sudden, he owned all of his time again. Yeah, he wasn't making a lot of money anymore, but he owned every hour of his life. And that was the most valuable gift he could have ever been given, although it was very stressful at the time. And kind of reliving that, talking to my parents, brought me to some very interesting conclusions. And then we met this other family who are from Gabriola Island, and they're actually traveling around the world right now. They're going to take 4 years with their daughters to sail the world. And they kind of brought this idea up of kind of owning your time again. And they live between $15 and $25 a day on their sailboat. They bought a sailboat for, 20 grand. And sailboats don't hold value. So they're not investments. They're just basically floating houses. And because it's so inexpensive to travel in a sailboat, as long as the sailboat's in good condition, again, they own all their time. They're able to connect with their kids in a really real way. They spend all their time with their children. And it's just an incredible opportunity. And it really got me interested in sailing again in a way that I haven't been in a long time. And I thought about it. I was like, why am I so interested in sailing? And it's like, well, it's the exact same sensation that I originally had when I left my oil and gas job and traveled the world with Michelle to try and figure out, my course in life. And whether or not we go sailing or not is another question for another day, and not something we've decided upon. But the reflection that I had as a result of being down there was that Most of the people that take our programs are tired of their job, or they hate their job, or they don't love their job. They don't own their time anymore. And this was an insight that I had when I was working in the oil and gas industry. I watched this 3-minute video or 5-minute video, I can't remember how long it was, called Greening the Desert. And I realized that I was just supporting the status quo. And so I took out my calculator, being an engineer, and I calculated out how much life energy I actually had on this earth, or the average human. And the average human has about 600,000 hours of life energy. You're on the planet for about 600,000 hours if you live an average life. And I recognized right there that I'd burned through 1/3 of them. And actually, just recently, I woke my wife up in the middle of the night and I said, Michelle, wake up. And she's like, what's going on? And it's like, I'm halfway done. So the only currency we actually own is our life energy. It's the hours that we have on the earth. And that was what compelled me to quit my job. That was what compelled me to travel. And so I was on a journey without a map or a guide. And we had done some things that made that possible. And it was through doing those things that I'm going to talk about today that allowed me to find the path that I'm on. And some of these things are pretty generic and anybody can do them, and it won't necessarily lead you to become another Rob Avis or a permaculture teacher or any of these things, but it will lead you to where it can potentially lead you to where you need to be. And so because life is complex or hyper complex, you guys have all seen that quote that I give you guys, that when you're dealing with complex problems, the outcome is unknown. But you'll know that you want to be there when you get there. And so you just have to trust the process. So this is an attempt at trying to break down what we've gone through over the last 10 years, and actually longer than that, from a process perspective. So I was on a journey without a guide, without a map. I spent a lot of energy, time, and money. So we traveled the world for like 2 or 3 years. We were in parts of Africa, Egypt, Northern Africa, I guess, or the northern part of that continent, Europe, Middle East, Australia, the United States, Mexico, parts of Canada, searching. And so this series that I'm going to be talking about to you guys is basically a distillation of the most important steps when I look back on the last 10 years. And if somebody asked me to do it all over again, this is the process that I would take. The images that I've got in the slide in front of you right now, that's our Westphalia camper van. I bought that. I fixed it up. It had a turbo diesel in it. We ran it on vegetable oil for a lot of the time. And we ended up selling it in the end. It was a wonderful addition to our life. We got a lot of places that normally we couldn't get. And no matter where we were, there was home, because we could just pop the top and we'd have a sink and a kitchen and a bed and everything we needed. So that was what we traveled through North America and down into Mexico with. And it was a lot of fun. And the bottom image there is the time we spent in Denmark. So being that we were from the oil and gas industry, we spent a lot of time looking at renewable energy as potentially a new career path, because we wanted to be part of the solution and not part of the status quo. So we spent 6 months of that institute learning everything about renewable energy. And we still use that knowledge today. It's part of my consulting practice. It's part of how I teach my permaculture design course. That place, the Folk Center, which is what it's called, has a very fond and special place in my heart. And if people are interested in it, you can go visit it today, and I highly recommend it. So the first step in figuring out your path, if you will, and how to basically design for freedom is you've got to really figure out what your burn rate is. You need to understand how much you're spending on a weekly or a monthly basis. And back in the day, we didn't have Mint, and we didn't have banking software that would do this analysis for us. Now you can just use Mint or some banking software, and it's amazing the kind of analysis that's possible. But my wife and I actually got QuickBooks for our computer, and every month we would sit down and we'd do our budgets. And we would look at how much we were spending and where there were opportunities to save money. And being 2 mechanical engineers working in the oil and gas industry, our goal was to live on much less than we made. And so that meant things like basically trying to paddle up a creek, in the sense that we didn't buy a house. Sorry, my brain stopped working there for a second. We didn't buy a house, which was very weird for two mechanical engineers that are progressing really quickly through their career, moving up fast in their respective companies, making significant income. We chose not to buy a house. We rented. We still don't own a house, actually. And that might sound weird from a permaculture perspective, or because everybody thinks you have to own land, or we have access to land, but we don't own it. And so even though, in fact, I think I was just thinking about this the other day, our burn rate now with two kids is about the same as it was when we were both working in the oil and gas industry. And so this has created a lot of optionality for us. We are able to be really selective about who we work with. So I don't have to work for clients that I don't love. I don't have to, we unfortunately with this Google de-indexing thing that happened and us not being visible on the internet, we had to cancel a course this spring. Our kind of premier course in British Columbia, which runs every spring, didn't get enough registrations. And that was the first course we've ever had to cancel. And the thing is that because we've always lived by this premise of understanding our burn rate and living below it, it definitely hurt not to run that course. It hurt emotionally, it hurt financially, but because we're not desperate, because we always try and have a reserve in the same way that a tree stores extra energy in its roots, it has allowed us to be resilient. And so a lot of people that come to our programs or that we meet kind of in like outside of our bubble, if you will, this is a false or something, not false, but this is something that very few people do. People generally spend as much as they make or more. And so it causes a lot of fragility. It causes a lot of stress maritally. It causes stress internally. It causes stress with the children. And so it's really important to get a handle on how much energy is coming into your system. And when we're talking about money or finances, that energy is in the form of money. And then once you can establish how much is coming in, then you can do all sorts of stuff to try and reduce. And so this is also going to sound funny, but as part of our journey, after we had established our burn rate, we started coming up with ways that we could start cutting our expenses. And so one of the ways that we cut our expenses was actually house sitting. So not only did we not own a house and we rented for a long time, but then we actually went a step further and we became pro house sitters. Like we should actually have little badges right here on our chest with a certification as a pro house sitter. And so here's two kind of well-to-do mechanical engineers working downtown, living in other people's houses, using their dishes, sleeping in their beds, because they needed somebody to take care of their house while they were traveling. And there were so many opportunities to do this. We had people calling us from all over. We didn't have kids at the time. And it was a great opportunity to save, about $1,000 a month, just taking care of other people's homes. And sometimes I wonder if we should go back to that. But we have a really good situation right now, so I don't think that's something that we really need to do. But we house sat. One of the things that people can do to cut their burn rate down is buy bulk food. So we started buying bulk food. We buy bulk meat, we buy bulk legumes, we buy bulk grains. And so you can cut 20 to 30% of your cost of living down just by having bulk food in the house. Bulk food also increases your resilience. So if there's ever a food disruption, which isn't likely, but or I should say isn't probable, but it's possible. But we have bulk food and we kind of lived off bulk food ever since. We lived with one car. I think until Rowan was born, which is almost 7 years ago, I drove the same car that I had from high school. And so that car ended up with, when I finally gave it away, I gave it to our staff member at Verge, Alex. I sold it to her for $1. When I sold it to her, it had 400,000 kilometers on it. I'd pretty much fixed myself every component on that car. there are some things I didn't do, but that's probably why I don't like auto mechanics anymore. Not the mechanics themselves, but doing the repair myself anymore. It's really tough in this environment. And so I drove a car basically till it had 400,000 kilometers. I think in the States, that'd be like 250,000 miles or something like that. And it was hyper energy efficient. It was like, it got, 35 miles to the gallon. So it didn't use much gasoline. And it was a car that was really common. So the parts were cheap. So we did all of these things to try and save money. We wouldn't eat out. We got really good at cooking. And every once in a while we would eat out. It's not like we lived a completely austere lifestyle, but we were conscientious about how much we were spending, because we recognized, even if we didn't consciously recognize it at the time, looking back on it, I think we subconsciously knew it, that having resources, financial resources, having money in the bank was going to allow us to buy our time back, or at least not buy it back, but have it, so we could make decisions about how we wanted to spend our time. And to this day, we still have money that we put aside early in our career that allows us to not melt down as a result of not selling out one of our courses, or you're not getting a consulting job or something like that. And more importantly, from a business perspective, while we're just on the topic of business, having money in the bank means that, like I said, I'm not pushy when I try and sell stuff to people. In fact, I don't even think of it as selling. I'm just looking for a fit. And if you're looking to start your own green business, this is one of the most important things that you can get right from the beginning. Is the goal with selling products or services to people is not to try and force anything upon them. It's like when you go and buy a glove, you don't buy a glove that doesn't fit. You buy a glove that feels really nice when you put it onto your hand. And a product or a service that is well designed, it's high quality, it's still not going to be a fit for everybody. And so when you're actually having a sales conversation with somebody, the goal is to let them try the glove on. And if it fits, they'll make the decision on their own. And so salespeople that are really pushy don't really care about whether it fits or not. They just want the money. The reason they want the money is probably because fundamentally comes down to, not having enough, or not having put some money away, or spending beyond their means. There's lots of reasons for it. It's everybody's going to have a slightly different answer. But having that base and not living beyond your means completely changes your quality of life in every regard. So it was one of the most important things that we did right from the very beginning. And there's lots of ways that you can go about saving money. Mr. Money Mustache is a website you can check out, and that's his whole website's dedicated to this. So I highly recommend checking that out. The next thing, we didn't really have to do this because we never got into it, but getting out of debt is really important. And in Canada right now, I think Canadians are the most indebted people in the world. I think the US is not far behind. And when you get into kind of understanding how our system actually functions, our financial system, there's some great documentaries out there. I highly recommend watching Money is Debt. I can put that into the chat window for folks. It's Mr. Money Mustache. Mr. Money Mustache. And then the other resource that I recommend is Money as Debt. And you can watch that free on YouTube. And so when you start kind of delving into how the financial system works, and you start realizing that the money system that we all depend on requires the continual creation of more debt. Now, when debt is created, it is almost the same as creating fluidity in the environment, in the economy. And so let me say that again. When debt is created, it creates fluidity within the economy because of somebody's promise to repay it. However, when a bank creates debt, it only creates enough to pay the principal and not enough to pay the interest. So there's actually never enough money in the monetary system to pay both the principal and the interest. And the only way that the interest can be generated within the general monetary system is if the overall debt load continually increases. So if you've ever wondered why the GDP has to constantly grow, the GDP, or gross domestic product of any country, needs to grow so that there's an opportunity to create more debt, so that the people that have taken out debt in the past have the potential to go out into the overall monetary system to collect money through jobs in order to pay their debt plus their interest. So if the economy ever stops growing, the economy will implode because there's not enough money to pay all the debt and all the principal. So there's not enough money to pay all the principal and pay off all the interest. So you can try and wrap your head around that. If that doesn't make sense, watch that documentary, Money is Debt. So we know that we live on a finite planet, and we know that we have finite resources, and we know that we've come through some very interesting quantitative easing and debt mechanisms to try and keep the wheels on the bus, so to speak. And there's a lot of vested interest in keeping this system alive. So, I think that the chances of it collapsing again are possible. And I would say it's not improbable. I don't know whether it's probable or improbable. I certainly worry about the economy in terms of how it's going to affect me. It's something that I think about. It's something that I insure myself against. And I'm not talking about buying conventional insurance policies, but not having debt. And this whole thing we're talking about over the next few weeks is going to be basically how to create insurance without an insurance company. Being in the midst of all of this, when the debt bubble finally explodes, which may be in my lifetime, it may not. And really, it's not about getting out of debt to be out of because you're scared of debt. It's being out of debt so you own your time. And that's really the crux of it. This really struck me when I was looking into debt and trying to understand how the overall global system functions. And my wife is Francophone, or Quebecois, I should say. So she speaks French. And we were talking about mortgages one day. And she's like, do you know that in Quebec, they don't actually use the word mortgage? And I said, really? Why not? And she said, oh, well, they use the word hypothèque. And I said, well, what's the difference? And she says, well, mortgage is actually a French word. It's two words together, mort and gage. So mort means death and gage means pledge. And so you can imagine going into a bank in Quebec and asking for a death pledge so that you can basically acquire a house. And so that kind of has always stuck with me. And I'm not saying we shouldn't get mortgages and we shouldn't buy land with debt and all of that stuff, but we tend to pay more attention to the type of milk that we buy in the store than the contracts that we create in order to put a roof over our house, especially a roof over our house where we spend the majority of our time out of our house working for somebody else so that we can pay off our death pledge. Again, what I'm saying is, like, get into debt conscientiously and understand how that debt is going to affect your quality of life. If it's going to be a positive effect, if it's going to be a negative effect. And then if you're going to go into debt, is there a way that you can turn your house into something that will actually pay for itself? So, for example, my backyard grows most of my greens most of the summer long. I did a video recently on monetizing your backyard with a greenhouse. You can, turn your greenhouse into a microgreens operation and have a 200 square foot piece of property in your backyard generate somewhere between 40 and 80,000 Canadian for microgreens, depending on how good you are at growing them and how big the market is. I mean, there's a lot of ifs there, but my front lawn, it's not a lawn anymore, is now a food forest. And so it creates habitat for birds, but it creates berries for my kids. It creates hiding spots and forts for them. So we tend to think of our house as this thing that only does one thing for us. It creates a status symbol for most people. It puts a roof over top of our head. And that's about as far as it goes. And then, we end up having to pay these exorbitant amounts of money to the bank in order to pay for it for 30 years. And then we're constantly being, bloodlet with buying our utility utilities, our electricity, our gas, and all of these things. And so what one of the things that we try and help people with is figuring out how you can turn every part of your home into a harvesting surface. So your roof can be a water harvesting surface to collect rainwater. It can collect solar energy so you don't have a power bill. It can collect solar thermal energy so you don't have a natural gas bill for your domestic hot water. You can use the grass, which typically we spend money to cut, and then we haul that grass away and then bring fertilizer back in to keep it growing. You can turn that into a garden to feed yourself. And if you've checked the price of organic kale recently, it's like $1 a leaf. My kale plants last year was a bad year, but 2 years ago produced 50 leaves per stalk. So that's, $50 a plant, and I can get 1 to 2 of those in a square foot. That's $100 a square foot. That's pretty substantial. So we have to think about these tools a little bit differently. And only then will we start to kind of reclaim that life energy. And so we started by understanding how much we spent. Then we figured out how to reduce what we were spending to a minimum level. And even though we didn't have debt to get out of, if you're in debt, you really do need to figure out how to pay it off as quickly as you can so that you don't have this crushing weight on your back. So that's the 3 steps that I want to talk about this week. And if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I've got another half hour booked here on YouTube right now if you guys want to ask any questions. Next week, we're going to continue on our conversation, and I'll just give you a sneak peek. So I'm going to be doing these talks every Monday until we get through all of the different parts of this presentation. So next week, we're going to talk about saving the surplus. We're going to talk about getting healthy. We're going to talk about reskilling and how important that is. I mean, really, if you think about traveling, it's all about, and what we did for traveling is all about reskilling ourselves. So broadening our understanding of work, and so that we could plug into different places with different skills. So, looking at mechanical engineers right now in Calgary with the melting down of the oil industry, there's a lot of mechanical engineers that are out of work right now. And with that surplus of mechanical engineering talent, it's going to be hard for them to find jobs. And so right now we're in a reskilling phase of the economy right now. Building a holistic context. We'll talk about, holistic decision-making and why that's so important. We're going to talk about determining if you are going to look for another job or to start some sort of a green or permaculture-based business and what that might look like. We're going to list out all the options about how to, with regards to green businesses that I've seen, and there's plenty of them. We'll talk about building a business plan. You can start by how you can start this business without putting your family into risk in terms of, walking away from a job and then all of a sudden you're kind of stranded. So how to do it in an intelligent way, and then how to stay out of debt, and basically eventually work your way up to going full time with this. And I should say that designing for freedom doesn't necessarily mean building a business. This might just be building a homestead, or taking your existing property or home, whether it's urban or rural, to a place where it's not costing you anymore. It's actually giving back to you. So there'll be lots of opportunity to talk about all this stuff. And that's kind of a broad overview of where we're going to go with this. And so I'm going to open it up to you guys to ask any questions that you might have about this topic. This video will be going back up onto YouTube afterwards. So if you want to watch any of it again and listen to the story one more time, feel free to do so. Do you guys have any specific questions about this? Anything we talked about today, or I can even open it up to any kind of permaculture related stuff as well. But I'd love to answer questions about some of the stuff we talked about today. I'm sure that as we get into some of these other subjects, there's going to be a lot more information to talk about. What I've talked about today is pretty straightforward. It's funny because a lot of the best advice that I've ever been given is the stuff that's the most straightforward stuff that nobody seems to do. And so, yes, it's straightforward. Yes, it's simple. Yes, you've heard it a million times. But what's preventing you from taking that advice and making it into a reality? What are the things that, and let me ask you a question, what are the things that you could do right now within your own life to cut your burn rate down? Do you guys have any ideas about that, or options that are sitting in front of you that you could do? And what would those look like? And then another question for you is, do you guys have any additional resources around cutting burn rate? So are there any other opportunities or web-based resources about cutting burn rate that come to mind? I can hear some crickets out there. There's not much action on the chat window there. Frankie, yes, I've learned a lot since starting your course, and I had to ask myself some tough questions, like decisions that will affect the rest of my life. Initially, I wanted to make it work since I own. I'm sure there's another part to that question. I've been out of debt many years, Richard Russ. Awesome, Richard. So Frankie continues, I wanted to make it work since I own my property. However, I have learned that this property and relocating to the Midwest is a type 1 error for me. Oh no, that's too bad. But you know what? Sometimes type 1 errors are our best gifts, because they give us, they're red flags that we can use to realign our life, instead of kind of trying to make things work in a way that's not necessarily aligned with our life. And so it's an opportunity in disguise, and you really do have to take that principle to heart about looking at the problem as a solution. So where do you want to move, Frankie? What's your plan there? Where would be the perfect place for you to live? And for other folks, yeah, my family is located in Texas. Yes, and I agree with you, realigning your life. Cool. Yeah, Texas is a place that I've always wanted to visit. I think I will definitely make it down there at some point. Lubbock, Texas. Okay, well, I'm going to look that up on Google Maps. I want to take a look at that little region. So because this video is going to be live on YouTube later, anybody that's watching this right now, I'd be curious to ask you the same questions. So any advice that you've got, great resources that you found, you can put them in the chat window below. I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are on all of this. Yeah, Frankie, I was in Mexico. It was a really great place, and I think we're going to try and make it down there once a year. It was wonderful to not have my cell phone, and made me realize that maybe I don't need my cell phone. Maybe it's an expense that I can get rid of. Marcus, I'm saving up to buy a property right now. Awesome. Where is that property going to be, Marcus? Love to know. And what do you hope to do with that property? And I'm curious to know what other goals people have right now that they're working towards. Manitoba, awesome. Whereabouts in Manitoba? I'd love to know. I've got a bunch of friends in Manitoba. Josh, it's challenging to start the ball rolling in regen ag and silvo because that is a life I want, but I don't know if the market will support it. So Josh, tell me more about what you hope to produce as a result of this regen ag project, and where you're struggling in terms of market analysis or some of the business struggles that you're having. I'd be interested to hear more about that. Frankie, I love Mexicans. They are a hard-working group of people. Absolutely. You know, Frankie, one of my biggest insights while being in Mexico was, and there's really only two types of people in the world that go to Mexico. People that look at the Mexican countryside as a dirty, dirty place because there's garbage everywhere, and people that look at it and have a deeper understanding of what's actually going on there. Mexico is, and I don't mean this in any negative, condescending or derogatory sense at all. It's actually a compliment. and I'll explain it. But Mexicans, or Mexico, I should say, is like one step removed from anarchy. Not in every region, but in some of the regions. And the thing is with Mexico is that if you go to Mexico and you fall down a hole and you die, it's your fault. Whereas in Canada and the United States, if you fall down a hole, it's everybody's fault except for you. Mexicans are real. They are incredible individuals. And the garbage that you see everywhere is actually no worse than how we deal with it in Canada and the United States. We just have an unlimited amount of money, it seems, to bury all of our garbage into a landfill, which I would argue is no better and might even be worse than letting it blow around. So there's no veneer when you go to places like the Baja in Mexico. It's just real, and you start realizing how fake it actually is in Canada and the United States, and how unreal it actually is right here. Frankie, my oldest son married his high school sweetheart, and she is a Mexican, a real wholesome girl, preacher's daughter. Right. Awesome. Sukiram Isran. That's a really nice name. I like that. Hello and good morning from Indonesia. Hey, how's it going? Marcus, I want to transition from working a call center job right now to ultimately making my livelihood from property I own. I'd love to raise hogs ethically and sustainably and have a market garden. Marcus, you and I have a very similar dream. That's definitely where I'm headed as well. I haven't quite made my trek out of the city yet for lots of reasons, but I think that's a wonderful dream, and I think you should keep it central in your heart and work very hard towards it. And I bet you that you'll definitely, I don't bet, I know you'll get there. Joy Rigby, I've been trying to figure out how to live without a cell phone as well. My husband and I would both love to be able to get rid of ours. The charges these days seem exorbitant. Yeah, I agree with you, Joy. I'm starting to think that just having an answering machine and a home phone number is a really great option. And I bet you that it would not affect my productivity at all. In fact, it would probably improve my mind space. Josh, running animals, for example, is a little bit of a square peg in a round hole. Our seasons really create challenges. Tell me more about this, Josh. I'm not sure where you're going with that, but I think you have a similar climate to ours, and so I think you can do similar things that we can do here. Salamat Pagi Sukiman. I'm assuming that is Indonesian. Thanks, Mrs. Frankie. Salamat Pagi Jade. I'm assuming that's Indonesian, so it's awesome to have that on this channel. I'm really excited to have somebody from Indonesia on YouTube with me. Marcus, awesome. Thanks so much, Rob. Your channel has been an invaluable resource. Well, you know, Marcus, I really appreciate that comment, and thanks so much for saying such kind words. So, folks, I've got another 10 minutes if you guys want to ask a few more questions, and from there, we can continue on next week. Frankie asked one more question here. What's your take on cordwood building? That's a great question, Frankie. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan. And I think that there's probably some good examples of cordwood building, but the thought of having cross-sectional timber amongst cob in a wall makes me a little nervous, to be honest. Number one, there's the possibility for it to rot, but you could say that the same exists for straw. And if it's built properly, it'll have a proper overhang. And so you should be able to overcome that. Number two, though, is that you've got two different mediums that are going to expand and contract at different rates. And so I think that that's a bit of an issue. I have a lot of building practices that I really like. Yeah, there's the insulation. But, you know, if you were going to go back to Texas and you were looking for a natural building material that would be highly aligned with that ecosystem, depending on the type of help that you had and how DIY you are and how much work you wanted to put in. For that region, probably one of my favorite building methodologies is compressed brick earth. And it's amazing. Like for a few gallons of gasoline and a brick press, you can build a house in about 3 or 4 days. If you need extra insulation, you can put insulation, you can do a double brick wall, or you can do an EIFS, which is an exterior insulated facade system on the outside of a single brick wall. And then once you're done, if you built the brick machine yourself, you can then either sell it or rent it out to other people to do the same. So I'm a big fan of that. Big fan of straw bale. I like the unified material going through the wall there. And I mean, basically, when we talk about permaculture, one of the things that we talk about is this idea of water access and structures. So water access and structures is a really important process when we design property, because when we build and design our water systems, we end up finding our earth resources for our roads. And when we find the earth resources for our roads, we also end up finding out what our indigenous resources are for building a house. So that's one of the reasons that structures is always last within permaculture. So instead of saying, I want to build cord wood or I want to build compressed earth brick, once you own a property, if it's got nothing on it, you should be doing an assessment or a diagnosis of that property, and then understanding what the bioregionally appropriate building methodologies are for that property. Hopefully that answered your question. Josh, the idea is to restore a section of forest. Our soil is poor for supporting the more diverse forest savanna. Without animals, the struggle is real. Yeah, you do need animal traction. Animals are basically your best workers. So I can definitely hear you on that. Goofy Roofy, Rob, have you watched Jeff Barrick's stuff? Sounds like you might like it. He's in Mexico and understands the whole monetary system. Yeah, Goofy, I'd love for you to send me a link to it. I definitely would watch that. I think you sent me an email yesterday or this morning. So I think you have my email address. Frankie Robertson, compressed brick earth. Yeah, Frankie, totally. So if you want to get some information on that, there's a great book, which I will try and remember to bring to the next session, written by, in fact, I have a YouTube video on this, a book written by Chris Magwood. And it's in my YouTube channel, and I think it's called The Most Important Video. Let me see if I can find it for you right now quickly. Just give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to go to my channel here and see if I can find this, this video on natural building. And see if, well, there's actually a couple here I'll send to you guys. Here we go. Okay. So here's one video that I recommend watching. It's not very long. And here is another one. Okay. So you can take a look at that. Let's see, I got a couple more questions here just to round out the day. Okay, Josh Steele, we got 4 new inches of snow this morning. Happy Easter. Yeah, we've been getting snow on and off here too, Josh. Frankie, I agree with you, Rob. Great, awesome. Yeah, take a look at those videos, Frankie. Let me know what you think. Christopher Manea, moving to 10 acres of undeveloped mountain in Arkansas. That sounds awesome. Love to see where you're heading there, Christopher. Okay, guys. Well, that brings us to the end of the questions. Again, if you found this useful, hit the like button. It really helps my channel track. I really love it when I get all these likes. It tells me I'm doing the right thing. And if it's a fit, I'd love for you to share this on social media. It'd be really great. And yeah, so we'll be back. I think if you guys didn't miss, if you missed the announcement in the newsletter, I'm not doing the case studies this Wednesday night. That's April 4th. I'm actually traveling up to Northern Alberta to do a talk on profitable farming and farm design. But I will be back next Wednesday with the first case study after the Introduction to Permaculture course. And then this Friday, we're going to be talking about context-specific diets or eating the way nature intended. I apologize if you were waiting for me last Friday. I got so excited working on a project that I completely missed my date on YouTube with you guys. So we'll be back this week to continue on with that 6-part series. Thank you guys so much for showing up, and we'll catch you guys on the next video. All right. Have a great week. Adios.